go for you. If a young person came up to you and questioned whether their vote matters, how would you reply? What is your response?
Absolutely. So I do believe your vote matters. If we just go back for one to history, right? There was a lot of African Americans that fought for us to have the right to vote. And so, they paved that way, and I think we should utilize that our rights to that. But in not just that, if you think about it, we make a big deal about the presidential election, and it is a big thing, right? But you forget about the people that are at your state and local level, and those are the people who will impact you more so first before a presidential decision funnels through, right? And so if we don't vote and we don't make educated and informed decisions of, our Supreme Court judges, our attorney generals, our police chiefs, if we don't go and vote for those individuals, then ultimately what has happened in 2020 will continue to happen because we did not put those right people in these leadership positions. So I think when you vote, just think about how it impacts you and in your community. So if you ever ask that question, why does my vote matter? Think about the impact that it would make if you didn't vote. I think that's a good spin on it. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Christina, this is something that maybe you've heard before as someone who's leading Bruins Vote, and it's kind of the purpose or one of the overarching goals of that organization. How do you respond, or would you if you heard this question from somebody?
Yeah, kind of echoing off of what Ashley said. There's so many other things on the ballot besides the presidential elections. And I feel like in California, especially, young people and people in general don't think their vote matters because whether you're like on the left side of politics or on the right side of politics, California generally swings blue. But that's just not true because there are so many other things on the ballot. There are state propositions, state officials, local officials, and that is like a direct form of democracy where you are directly voting those people and those propositions in, and those policies and those officials will like have an impact on your life for like years to come. And people just need to educate themselves on like what else is on the ballot besides like the presidential elections, because those people have arguably like a bigger impact on your life than the president.
Couldn't agree more. And now Ryan.
Yeah.
What is your take?
Everyone I think said it all. I'll just add a couple of things. One, it was Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a famous civil rights activist and women's rights activist. It was her birthday this week. So although she passed, she would have been 103. And she once said that nobody's free until everybody's free. And I think about that statement when I think about what's at stake in this election, not just, as Christina mentioned, about presidential election, which is very important, but all the initiatives that are on the ballot here in California, all the millions of dollars that can be invested in school boards, depending on who you vote for, thinking about Proposition 15, which we'll talk more about around schools and communities first, but also think about my experience at UCLA. So I came to UCLA the year after Proposition 209 passed, which ended affirmative action in the public sector. Out of a class of 4,000 freshmen, I was one of 27 Black men who got into UCLA alone. That number was less than in 1967 when I came in. Those votes for that proposition ended up impacting generations of Black students and Latino students within the institution. We have this fall the opportunity to repeal Proposition 209 through Proposition 16. So our votes really do matter because they do impact students' livelihoods, families' livelihoods, people of color livelihoods. So we have to make sure that the voting that we're doing is in reflection of the values that we currently have. And I think this election shows that now more than ever.
Wonderful. Wow. I felt like I was back at UCLA poli-sci class. That was very good. So next question is, and I get a lot of questions about this as well, especially with this election cycle, is changes to the voting process, in-person, mail-in, absentee. what that's going to look like coming for November. Obviously, we will still have traditional modes of voting, but it's going to look a little different this cycle, given COVID and public health safety standards. So Ashley, and actually everyone as well, what changes can folks expect this November in terms of voting, how to vote, mail-in voting, absentee ballots, etc.? I've seen the drop boxes that have been placed around LA City, LA County. We have 3 in Westwood, 2 on campus, I believe. I've seen them everywhere. So that's one of the changes. But if you want to speak to that and then others chime in, I know this is a big, complex topic, but this is something that folks are really wondering about.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned it, right? So there's really 3 different ways you can vote: a mail-in ballot, an absentee ballot, or in-person voting on day of election. My suggestion would be to early vote, because everybody, it will, I say everybody, but I don't know what the turnout will be on day of election, right? So just to get ahead of it, and make sure, you have all your ducks in a row, I would just go ahead and vote early. The changes with the mail-in ballots, as you all know, there was a lot of scrutiny to what was happening with the United States Postal Service. So my suggestion there would be to, if you have a mail-in ballot, I actually just submitted my absentee ballot for the state of North Carolina. And so what I did was I sent it home, and then I had my mother, they allow you to have someone to drop your ballot off for you on your behalf. So I would suggest that if you know somebody, where you have to send in your absentee ballot, send it to the family member and have that family member drop it off for you at a polling site, or at the county's elections office. I think that's the best way to go there. But everybody should make an informed decision. Know your polling site. The polling site might not exist due to COVID, so locations might be limited. Just know where you're going on whenever you decide to vote, and then make sure you cast your ballot educationally, knowing who's on the ballot.
Absolutely. Christina, or anyone else, changes folks can expect in terms of how to vote this November?
Yeah, I just want to add that the drop boxes in LA County, at least, or the ones near Westwood, are LA County only. So they will accept other mail-in ballots from like other counties in California, but they can't guarantee that it'll be mailed in time. So just take that into consideration when you're choosing where to drop off your mail-in ballot. And they won't accept out-of-state mail-in ballots. So just for like anyone listening who wants to drop off their ballot, just make sure to know that information. Also, as long as it's in there, like in the post office, or just like mailed by November 3rd at 8 p.m., California is giving 17 extra days for it to get to where it needs to go. So with that, also just like don't necessarily expect election results on November 3rd. I think that's important to note because of this whole new system where a lot of people are utilizing mail-in ballots. We might not get results on election day. It might turn into election week or election month. So that's just an important thing to say.
Great, thank you, Christina. Next is one of the next question is one of the overarching topics for today around voter suppression. Corey, I'd like to get your take on this. You have an extensive knowledge on this topic. First of all, how would you define voter suppression? And then 2, a question I hear a lot is what can we do to push back against it? So a 2-part question there.
Thank you for this question. Voter suppression sounds like horrible. Just suppression, just in general, sounds horrible. And I just wanted to just first start by getting a good definition of it. Suppression is just anything that discourages anyone from doing something that you don't want them to do. So voter suppression is about all of the tactics and strategies that are used to ensure that a particular segment of the population does not have either access to vote or is either intimidated or dissuaded from voting in any way. Now, we have a rich history in America around voter suppression. In fact, voter suppression is something that is sort of internationally internationally connected with American society, because we take a lot of tactics around voter suppression and we reinvent them to make sense for the American populace. It starts just by thinking about who legally can vote. So in our history, that obviously started with white property owning males. And then through a variety of different movements, we allowed certain segments of the population to vote. And then we took those things away. We had Jim Crow laws, which were violence, and property test, and literacy test, and grandfather clauses. And then we saw the resurgence, or just the emergence, rather, explosion of mass incarceration. And then we took away the rights of people to vote who had felonies or any other form of carceral interaction. And then we have poll taxes. And now today we are seeing, voter ID laws. In fact, the voter ID laws is a big one, because that started shortly after 2000, in which Al Gore and President Bush had the whole thing that happened in Florida. And so the Republicans stated that they would find ways to ensure that there would be no voter fraud. So voter suppression, just in general, I just want to just debunk that. It's about what do we do, what do we say to discourage people from voting? And one of those things just currently today is around really delegitimizing the vote by mail process. With President Trump already stating that it can't be trusted, that it will leave too much room for error in terms of counts, that it will ensure that people have a lot of opportunity to commit voter fraud, which we all know is illegal, and that he simply will not accept those the results, I think, is a form of voter suppression in of itself. Another piece of it is also the poll watching. I think that someone put in the Q&A, how does someone become a poll watcher? I just want to address that because I think it's related. It varies by state. Every state, every jurisdiction has its own qualifications. There might be a particular sort of set of rules around how long you've had to live there, how you voted, maybe a particular candidate can appoint each person. It all just varies. So I encourage you to look at your local website just to take a look at how to become one. But one thing that's particularly alarming about this is that during the last debate, President Trump mentioned something around standby to the group that he associates with. And I'm being kind of cryptic here because I don't want to say too much, but essentially that's a form of poll watching. And poll watching in and of itself, especially in a historical context, could be used as a form of voter suppression because of intimidation and also violence. This other piece around safety. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. That's why we're having this UCLA Volunteer Day for the first time ever, completely digitally and completely virtually. And it's because people don't feel safe being out amongst folks, and a poll or a precinct could actually be a super spreader network. When you go to the polls and you want to vote, that could be a place where a lot of people can spread coronavirus, and therefore people are fearful. And that's why Ashley is stating we have to vote early. So voter suppression, the ways that we combat it are, if you see something, say something. You have to take a look at your vote by mail ballot right away. First, you have to make sure that you receive it, and then you have to open it. So my wife and I, we just received ours on this week on Tuesday. We opened it right away just to make sure that all of the different areas that we can vote on are reflected there. If you see a lot of vote by mail ballots, just for example, in LA County, we just heard a news article about this, that are behind a dumpster or something like that, you have to notify the authorities, because that means that people are actually systematically not getting access to their civic right. And that is it's a matter of legality, but it's also a matter of voter suppression. And the last thing that I'll state, because I want to make sure that I'm giving airtime to others, is that when it comes to voter suppression, there are a lot of ways to do this, some more sophisticated than others, but the rule of thumb is around fairness. If you believe in your heart, like there's an instinctual kind of moment that you have where it's like, that doesn't seem right. Like, why didn't this person get a chance to vote? Or you said that you're supposed to be receiving your vote by mail ballot, but it hasn't come. Or you're getting a weird phone call saying that you didn't register, but you actually did register. Those are all forms of voter suppression. And let alone not even talking about all of the misinformation that we're seeing on digital platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, that's dissuading people from voting. So as I stated before, voter suppression has a very long history in this country, has a very long history in other countries as well. It's not something that is unique to the United States, but it is something that we have to be on the lookout for because it constantly reinvents itself so that to meet, whatever the particular culture is at the time. So I just want to make sure that people get into the habit of being attentive to voter suppression tactics and also saying something when they can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Corey. That was very informative. To continue on that topic, though, Ryan, would love to get your take as well on what groups historically have been suppressed and how that's played out in elections, how that's shaped our electoral process, I guess, how that plays into real life.
Yeah, and I'll build on what Corey has said. I agree with you. It's been really informative. So, we're sitting at 150 years since the passage of the 15th Amendment that gave Black men the right to vote. We're at almost 100 years where from the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women and Black women the right to vote. And then we're thinking about 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. And you would think we were good, but let's be truthful. Systemic institutional racism have made it very easy for people to think, for people to suppress, particularly Black voters, particularly Latinx voters, particularly poor voters, from actually getting out to vote. So everything Corey mentioned is intentional. It's not by accident, it's absolutely by design. And I think this election cycle, we're seeing clearly that this is by design. And it's not even like behind a veil at this point. People are actively figuring out ways to particularly suppress Black voting. And this is where I think we can think about how the intersections of institutions, for example, unfortunately, because of the mass incarceration system, we know that Black folks and brown folks are more likely to have been within the criminal justice system. We know that there's a lot of active disenfranchisement of people who have felonies. And even as states like Florida and others try to re-enfranchise folks with felonies, we see that there have been a lot of efforts to ensure that those folks don't vote. We know that voter ID laws are terrible. Actually, I believe you're from North Carolina. Is that correct? North Carolina is like known as one of the worst states in the entire country for their massive voter suppression efforts. Whether you're thinking about how they've redistricted like whole communities in order to suppress votes. Their voter ID laws are off the charts, and that just continues. Even though North Carolina is changing demographically, changing as far as who's voting and who's a part of what party, that threat has made it more likely that you're seeing these tactics that are happening that are really challenging. The other thing is that, and unfortunately, in poor communities and communities of color, you see long wait lines to vote, less places where you can actually cast your ballots. And as Corey mentioned, a lot of people are scared right now to either vote early or to mail in their ballot. So they're saying, well, we're going to wait in line. Well, the challenge with that is, number one, whether there be some threats of false safety, but I don't know if you saw in Georgia counties where people were banging on the windows saying, we've been waiting 3, 4, 5 hours to cast our vote in the last election cycle. Those things are happening, particularly happening in communities of color, not to mention what we just heard about Houston, where there'll be one drop-off ballot per county, and in Houston of all places, although I know that's being challenged by the courts. So I just want to say this is by design, and it's happening more than ever. And I think we have to be diligent in thinking about voting early. We have to be diligent in not allowing these scare tactics to stop us from voting. We absolutely, this election cycle, need to stand up, because it is a vote for the folks in your community, but it's a vote against these tactics that have been happening for hundreds of years, and in a place like the United States that states we are the bedrock of democracy across the world, clearly we are not living our values when we tell Black, Latinx, Indigenous folks, poor people that that we're going to put even more barriers for you to vote. So now is the time to vote because your vote matters, and also to vote to ensure that these tactics do not become successful and that we fight them both in the courts, but we fight them with our feet to the ballot.
I also like to extend the point that when you cast a ballot, if you choose to do so, mail-in or absentee, please make sure that you read and follow all of the instructions, because that's another way where they exclude us, right, from the count because we did not simply read the instructions. So, if it tells you to use a black pen, please be clear, you need to use a black ink pen, right? If it tells you to fill in the bubble completely, then please believe you need to fill in the bubble completely, right? Because these are things that they're looking and waiting for to toss our ballots out. So please make sure that you do not miss your opportunity for your vote to be counted simply because you did not read the instructions.
Thank you both for that. And some very excellent points made there that I will personally take to heart. And a great point as well by Ryan that this is by design. A lot of voter suppression is not accidental. It's intentional. It's been tweaked over time. It reinvents itself, and it's very much purposeful in what it hopes to achieve. But what I'd like to chat or talk on next, and Christina, maybe you can start us off with this, and then Ashley. You both lead organizations that encourage young people to get out and vote, which I think is critical. I do believe that the youth vote and getting that those percentages higher hold real electoral power in this country, in the city, in the state. So Christina, what are some strategies that your organization or Bruins Vote utilizes to help increase that turnout among that population specifically?
Yeah, totally. Well, Bruins Vote and like CalPERG's New Voters Project kind of operates under the idea that peer-to-peer contact is the best way to register people to vote. So we want to help register at least 2020 students for the 2020 elections. And we just know that students are more likely to turn out when contacted by a peer over being contacted by like a professor and contacted multiple times. So we're like making this all happen through a combination of like peer-to-peer phone banking, working with like student groups, faculty, administrators to like embed voting into campus culture. And with that being said, if y'all are interested in getting in the work, we have a huge voter registration blitz planned for next week, since the California deadline to register is Monday of week 3, October 19th. So we're having like a ton of phone banks, a ton of relational organizing. We're raffling off really fun items like AirPods and Beats at some of the events. So if you're interested in volunteering with Bruins Vote, I'm going to drop that link in the chat.
Great, thank you, Christina. And Ashley, as you as well lead an organization focused around young people. What strategies or how do you encourage young folks specifically who may be tuning into this as part of Volunteer Day for UCLA to encourage them to get out there and utilize their voice?
Yeah, definitely. So as part of Los Angeles Urban League Young Professionals, we've had a number of seminars, sessions, town hall, podcasts to make sure that you have not missed the information around this important election year. And so we've talked about some of the propositions that will show up on the ballot and how to dissect it, right, to make sure that you make an informed decision, because I think a lot of times the wording on some of the ballots and the propositions can get a little blurry, right? So we help to break that down so you can better understand what that looks like. We've had a brunch and learn where we vibed out to music and we had mimosas. Again, all of this was virtual, but it was a good time, but it was also an opportunity for you to learn. So we are doing our part. We have partnered with When We All Vote, which is an organization that have partnered with a number of top tier celebrities, one including the former First Lady Michelle Obama. So, you know, we're doing what we can. We have phone banks, we have text banks. So there's not a day that goes by where my email is not ringing for the next event. So another thing that we should note is the census, right? The extension for that has been extended to October 31st. So I think if you have not completed the census, some time has been given to you to complete that. And literally it takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes to complete the survey. Again, it's like voting, right? If you don't do it, you can't complain. And so it impacts you and your community going forward. So if you don't complete it now, guess what? You have another 10 years that you have to wait before you can make that count. So
Thank you.
A quick piece on the census. So Los Angeles County has the biggest population of hardest to count residents. Nearly half of LA County residents, about 5 million people, live in a neighborhood where it's difficult to count folks. And by studies show that every person who doesn't fill out the census in California, there's potential $1,000 lost to our state budget, and particularly for Black folks, for Latinx folks, for low-income communities. I think it's imperative that we fill out the census. So we have to October 31st, as Ashley mentioned. I know we're talking a lot about November, but I need you to get to October 31st and make sure your census is filled out as your first step. And then let's get to the ballots in November as well. And voting early and mail-in ballots, all that needs to be happening at the same time. Just don't forget the census. It's so important for the representation, particularly of POC folks and low-income communities.
Wonderful, thank you. And that actually led me into kind of my next question, or my next point, which was a call to action for everybody. What is your call to action for the folks listening? What should they do immediately after this call? What can they do to prepare? What's next? We'll start with Corey.
This is a big year. A community coalition, we actually refer to it as our epic battle, because we're actually voting for the future of our society. We see right now that there is such a impenetrable gap and division between the right and the left, the conservative and the liberal, like however you want to sort of name it. There's this polarity that exists. And I'd say that my call to action is simple. Vote in alignment with your values. You don't have to know all of the ins and outs of how everybody talks about everything and every issue and what may happen. Like that's why you have panelists like this, who come together. These are the things that we actually grapple with day in and day out, but sometimes I feel, just from a personal perspective, that people often are very hesitant to vote or to weigh in on something because they feel like, I don't have enough information. I haven't studied this. I don't know a lot about it. I have so many questions that are unanswered. Well, the reality is that there's a lot of questions that nobody's been able to answer, which is why we're in the exact predicament that we're in, where there's so many issues that have continuously reinvented themselves and just have been repackaged and put back out as a different name, where we are consistently struggling with issues of housing unaffordability, of education inequities, of people dying and not having access to good health care, and impoverished, and so many different things. I mean, nobody has figured these things out. We've made incremental adjustments and incremental progress towards figuring these things out. But the reality is that there are no objective experts in any of this. And so your responsibility, just by being an eligible voter in our society, is just to use your voice and vote. Vote in alignment with your values, vote in alignment with the vision that you have for our society, vote when you think about the people that you love and that you care about, vote in alignment with your own self-interest, vote so that you can ensure that if nothing else, you can say, well, I don't know how the cards are gonna fall, but I know that I did my part. And so that's all I would say, is that not to be hesitant and reserved and feeling, just sort of insecure because you don't know everything. Like I stated, nobody does. and to just say that my only civic responsibility and duty is to vote in alignment with what I believe. So that's my call to action.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Christina, call to action.
Yeah, I mean, same things I've been saying. You know, register to vote if you haven't already. I'm going to drop that link again. But if you're not eligible to vote for whatever reason, or your friends and family aren't, there's still so many ways you can get involved and be like a part of politics and have a say in government. So like fill out the census, like everyone was saying. LA is like undercounted by like millions of dollars. Volunteer with Bruins Vote, you know, you'll have like a direct action into democracy. You can lobby, you can donate your money, sign petitions, all of that. There's still so many ways you can get involved. So you don't have to vote to be civically engaged. And again, I'm going to drop the form for voter registration blitz week 2. Y'all should come out. It's going to be fun.
Ryan, call to action.
I started with Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm going to end with Bayard Rustin, who was a famous civil rights icon that a lot of people don't know, an open and out queer man who was the architect on the March of Washington. And he said that, that every community needs a group of angelic troublemakers. And I am going to say that, yes, I need you to fill out your census. Yes, I need you to vote in this cycle, but I need you to bring people along with you as well. Whether we're talking about your relatives, whether you're talking about your friends, your community. Christina mentioned kind of peer-to-peer outreach being really important. This is really a community effort, particularly this election cycle, but I'm gonna say every election cycle, and whether it's off a presidential cycle, we need that. A particular call to action that I think is important for me is I'm going to a couple of prop parties where you're going over propositions, you're going over the ballot, you're going over what needs to happen. I'm hosting one, so I'm gonna put in my contact information, learn about the propositions that are on the ballot. I will call out 2 as somebody in education. One, Proposition 15, that reinvests billions of dollars from corporations into schools. Whatever side that you're on, please look at Proposition 15, particularly if you care about how we invest in schools. And then Proposition 16, which repeals Proposition 209, which ended affirmative action in the public sector. This absolutely has an impact on our admissions policies across the state, but as well as how we target resources to student groups that we know need supports, like Black students, like Latinx students, like English learners, like foster youth, homeless, etc. So let's just think about that. So excited to get to work and to work with fellow angelic troublemakers.
Love it. Ashley, did we get you? Call to action.
I'm just going to concur with everything everyone else has said. You know, I think the important part there to stress is make sure you're bringing your family, your friends along as well to do their part because it includes all of us. Don't forget about your grandparents, right? You know, think about their health and safety. If you need to go pick up their ballot, then that's what you do on their behalf, right? So don't forget about the elderly. And then understand, you know, the importance of why voting matters, right? We talked about at the beginning. And let's be clear, there is a proposition that's on California's ballot to lower the age limit for for kids to vote. So going forward, this could impact you. So think about it like that. And then the conversation doesn't stop after November 3rd. Okay, so my call to action, I'm going to push you further into the next year. Let's hold these people we put in office accountable, right? Let's challenge them and give them pushback if they are not giving us, our communities, what it is that they said that they were going to do. So make sure you continue the conversation even after November 3rd. We're all praying for a miracle for the results after the election. But you know, still at the end of the day, no matter what it turns out to be, make sure you do your part to continue the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm getting the signal that we're approaching time. That flew by. I don't know if it's because it's still the morning for me or what it was, but probably because it was such a great discussion. There was one, I do want to get to at least one question in the chat because I said I would. And I agree, it's a very important topic around voter suppression. And voter, I guess, shaping and districts is gerrymandering. Want to open that up quickly if anyone has a minute or two around that topic. I agree, it's a big topic, especially for our conversation today, to share maybe what that is and steps being taken to address that.
So just really quickly, so gerrymandering is simply the redrawing of lines to diffuse power for your opposition, but to amass power for people that support you or that you're in alignment with. And it's super important to talk about this right now because we're actually in alignment with our census count. We go through a redistricting process that happens once every decade, in which people are going to be paying very close attention to sort of swing districts, if you will. We talk about swing states, states that are right there. They can go either way, Democrat or Republican. We're thinking about the same thing, but on a much more local level. And essentially, you want to make sure that there is one, a good representation of folks who are going to be overseeing that redistricting process. So that way the cards are stacked in a way that it's much more advantageous to everybody, or at least fair, because we've had egregious acts in the past where people have hijacked that process and simply drew lines in the ways that are going to benefit them. The reason why this is important is because the type of ways that you draw a line means that you now have access to leaning one way over the other, which means that you now can run candidates for Congress, and even also for your local and for your state elections, your assemblies and your senates. And that means that now all of the different voting decisions will come down to who can get the most votes. And typically, if they have the power is lodged in one particular district over another, then those people's interests are going to go ahead of the folks that they are opposed to. So I know that sounds like very heady, but essentially it's like, whose side are you on? If you're on the blue side or you're on the red side, if all districts swing red and red gets to basically run the entire table, or blue gets to run the entire table, then your own individual interests are going to be sort of muted by who gets to run the table. And so that's why gerrymandering is such an important thing to look at. Similar to census, redistricting is something that you do not want to just entrust to others without any form of engagement, without any form of scrutiny, because you have to make sure that those lines are drawn fairly, and you have to make sure that your vote is going to have weight. Because if you're the sole blue or the sole red in a predominant blue or red, or opposing district, then we get to questions like, does my vote really matter? So I just want to just connect that back to the first question, which was around that piece.
Thank you, Corey. Again, I feel like I'm getting my poli-sci degree again ×2 this morning. A lot of great information. I'm being told that we have to wrap at 10:55. So I would just want to quickly thank everyone who's been on this call, our panelists, Christina, Ashley, Corey, Ryan. Thank the Volunteer Center for this wonderful event and keeping this going virtually. I've done a couple volunteer days in person. I thought this is a good way to keep things going and keep things engaged. I believe the panelists dropped their contact info in the chat, so please feel free to reach out to them. Again, make a plan to vote early. Think about the different ways in which you can get people to vote with you. That's been mentioned. That is super key. We are 20-some days away from Election Day, so just keep that in mind. I want to thank everyone for being on this call today, and please have a good rest of your UCLA Volunteer Day. If you're continuing on to the other panels, I know we have some great panels later today as well. I'll be tuning in. But again, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Jeffrey, for helping set this up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.